Our speaker today is an outstanding example of Governor Blagojevich's ability to attract the best and brightest talent to his administration. The Illinois Department of Central Management Services is arguably the most powerful agency in state government. It surprised many when Governor Blagojevich tapped a business leader to run what many thought was the most political agency in state government. Our guest today served as president of People's Energy Services and later went on to become CEO of a biometrics company in Chicago. He holds his bachelor's degree in economics from the University of Michigan and an MBA from Northwestern University. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the City Club of Chicago, Michael Rumman. Michael?
Jay, thank you for that introduction. I'd like to also give a special thank you to Tom Donovan, who, after hearing what we had going on at the state, insisted that I come and speak to you all at the City Club. So I'm grateful to both gentlemen. Let me begin by telling you what I'm not going to speak about today. I'm not going to speak about the budget. John Filan is going to do a great job with that in the weeks to come. I'm not going to speak to you about public policy or any of the pending legislation that's going on in Springfield. I'm not even going to try and ride on the coattails of my friend Jack Hartman and the outstanding job that he's doing at the Tollway Authority. What I am going to talk to you about today is something that I'm very passionate about and is perhaps one of the best kept secrets out there, and that's the business of our state government. One of the things when Governor Blagojevich, thank you so much, one of the things when Governor Blagojevich asked me to take this job, I shared with him that I view myself as a fiscal conservative, a business leader who has long been very critical of the waste and inefficiencies of government. He reached out to me and I said, I'm not sure you really want me. I'm a critic of the way business operates, and especially to run central management services. I told him that the only way I could do a job like this is using best practices from the private sector. He said that is exactly what he wanted. Frankly, at the time, I wasn't sure that our visions actually aligned. But 2 years into this gig, I'm here to tell you they were exactly the same. No matter how difficult the decisions were that we needed to make, this governor never deviated from his charge to me to run the business of government like a business. Let me just quickly provide you with a brief overview of what CMS is. Most people, and believe me, if you've never heard of it, part of that is by design, and don't feel like you're alone. But let me give you just a quick overview of what CMS does. CMS oversees the $15 billion of procurable spend done by the state of Illinois. We oversee the IT and telecommunications of the state, which used to spend about $700 million a year. We are the facility managers of the state of Illinois, overseeing the state's 60 million square feet of owned and leased space. And we oversee the state's fleet of 10,000 vehicles, and it used to be 12,000 a couple years ago. We are the state's personnel department, overseeing the 60,000 employees underneath the governor. We are the internal auditors for the state, and we also conduct the labor relations, and we just finished union contracts, and believe me, that was no fun. If that sounds like a lot of work, I assure you that it is. But fortunately, Governor Blagojevich gave me great latitude to hire my own team and bring outstanding leadership in. Of the 30 to 40 leaders that I was allowed to hire at Central Management Services, almost all of them came from the private sector. I'd like to just give recognition to a few of them today. Brian Chapman, who is my Chief Operating Officer, I'm very grateful to. Ed Wynn, Chief Administrative Officer. Paul Campbell, Assistant Director. Bruce Washington. And a very special thank you to a person who's not here by the name of Larry Hall, who was my Chief Operating Officer, for which I'll always be grateful to. So, we'll have some fun with this. What did the business of state government look like 2 years ago? Let me begin with procurement. Again, the state spent $15 billion on goods and services. That's nearly 30% of our state's budget. The first thing we did when we showed up was we started asking for data in order to make informed decisions, as any good management group would. None existed. There was no central repository for procurement information, either within central management services and certainly not within the other agencies. Finally, we had, for months, the first few months, we simply manually aggregated data. And what we found out, and here's a few of the things we found out. First, we discovered the state did business with over 25,000 individual vendors, and we had 70,000 contracts out there. We found that it took 71 to 91 days to complete a simple commodity transaction. Imagine how long a complex transaction would take. Most agencies were doing their procurements independently and without any coordination. And we found that the state, as big as we are, often was paying above retail. If you and I walked into Walmart, we'd pay 88 cents for a gallon of windshield washer fluid. The state was paying $1.25. In Springfield, the state was paying $11.04 for temporary services at one state agency and $8.10 at another from the same vendor for the same job. Here's another one of my favorite things we found. One agency had hundreds of unused software licenses and inventory that we were paying fees on, while at the exact same time another agency was going out to bid for those exact same types of licenses. Here's my favorite part. Out of some of the major categories, 95% of contracts were simply renewed at termination. Simply renewed. This went on for decades. For those of you wondering why you've been unable to get contracts for state business, that's your answer. It was a closed party. Hear me now. For those vendors who have gotten fed off of this state government, that party is over. For those vendors who are waiting for our priorities to shift to quality services at a quality price, your time has come. Let me just share with you a few examples of the things that we've gotten done in this past couple years. First, we started issuing hundreds of RFPs. It was time to stir the pot and get them out there. We got these RFPs out there. We started mass renegotiation on contracts. A couple simple examples, like we renegotiated the Department of Corrections food purchasing and started buying in bulk. They used to buy cereal for all the inmates in those little boxes, and now we buy them in huge bulks. Cell phone rates. We all know how much they've come down in years. The state didn't know that. We were paying 14 cents a minute. We renegotiated that down to 6.8 cents a minute. And we had things like thousands of unused phone lines. I mean, literally, you could see the volume sitting on people's phones, and we got rid of thousands of those and just simply eliminated the monthly fee that was associated with it. Perhaps most importantly, we've implemented procurement best practices that will institutionalize our changes for years to come. Let me give you some examples. First of all, we implemented total cost of ownership, a common private sector practice. All of us know how cheap a printer is, but we also know that the hidden costs are in the cartridge and in the maintenance agreement. No longer will we let the state go without considering some of those hidden charges. We're putting in a spend database. Anyone in business knows you cannot make informed decisions without quality data. Now we will know exactly how the state spends its money, with whom, and for what. And I assure you, anyone who's played in state budgets knows that those numbers are way deep buried. We're implementing a knowledge management system. In the past, CMS or other agencies would enter into complex procurement negotiations blind compared to the vendors that we were sitting across negotiating from. Or if one agency did a complex procurement, that knowledge was completely lost after that procurement was finished. And the other agencies didn't have the benefit of it. Now we have the information and the means to share best practices and the external data so that we become an intelligent buyers of goods and services. We also made it easier to do business with the state. I think the slide that's on there right now talks about how long it took to do a procurement, and that was a simple commodity procurement. We have streamlined the process and reduced transaction time by 50% by standardizing contracts, automating processes, and removing redundant approvals. Those same contracts that took 71 to 91 days, I am very happy to tell you, are now down to 37 days. For our efforts in procurement, we were recently awarded what's known as the 2004 Cronin Award by the Nation's Society of Procurement Professionals. It recognized us for our extraordinary innovation in government procurement. I know it's not the Oscar or the Golden Globe, as Paul had made mention to, but we are very proud of that recognition. This is what we mean by running the business of government like a business. If the award doesn't impress you, let me give you the bottom line. In our first year out, and with only the categories that we targeted, we saved $109 million in year one, and we're targeted to save an aggregate of $200 million in our current year. That's real money. Let me change gears on you and talk a little bit about technology. And let me talk about information and communications in that area. The state in 2003 spent $665 million on telecommunications and technology. Let me put that in perspective. Some of the logos that you're hopefully seeing up there are Fortune 500 companies that spend a fraction of what the state of Illinois spends on technology. The more I looked into IT, the more I was absolutely blown away by how we were doing it. All 50 agencies had their own IT division working autonomously. In addition to the more than 1,000 employees already working in IT, we hired 600 independent IT contractors. Here's the best part. Those contractors were being paid at 1990s rates when you couldn't even hire an IT guy or gal. No one bothered to tell the state that the IT bubble had burst and those same individuals could be hired for a fraction of what we were paying them. It must have been a nice gig. There were no protocols, no standard, no economies of scale, and most of all, no coordination. Simply put, every agency was going in its own direction, doing its own thing. We ended up with things like hundreds of different accounting systems. Some agencies using very expensive ERPs, and other major agencies using QuickBooks, the same QuickBooks you'd buy at Circuit City. It was extraordinary. We ended up with dozens of email systems, and every agency had its own naming convention. I think there's a slide here showing a few examples of what exactly someone could, if you were trying to reach John Doe, the different ways you could get a hold of him. That kind of naming convention made it very difficult for even other state employees to find each other, let alone allowing the public to contact us. We had 22 separate data centers. These are big places, and most lacking the ability to communicate with one another and share information, and many so antiquated, their downtimes were 25 to 30% worse than industry standards. 5% would be bad. I picture this whole thing as a giant starburst, one explosion after another by every agency getting farther into deep space every single month. That was for Sue, like that slide. The systems continued to explode outwards, and our costs, I'm telling you, just continued to go upwards, just in a separate direction. This insanity is now over. The first thing we did at CMS was organize a group of CIOs and created a governance group called the ARB, the Architectural Review Board. Not a single IT dollar could get spent without going through this group. To date, 80% of all IT requests have even been rejected or modified because the ARB found them to be unnecessary, too expensive, too narrow, too broad. The bottom line is they were not going to follow the protocols or the standards that we had now established, and so therefore they needed to be modified. The dozens of email systems are being reduced to just 3, and that number is going to get down to 1 here shortly. And all of the naming conventions, this isn't done yet, but we're going to be switching all of the naming conventions to simply John Doe, and hopefully what you're seeing up there now. Hopefully. Hey. The 22 data centers are getting reduced to 5 data centers. They're going to be state-of-the-art facilities run 24/7. And by the way, those 600 IT contractors, we immediately cut that number down by 30%. and renegotiated every single remaining contract to current market rates. And amazingly, we hardly lost anyone. Surprise, surprise. Let me switch gears a little bit and talk to you about telecommunications. I'm sorry to say it wasn't any more businesslike over there. The state was operating 3 unnecessarily redundant data and voice systems. 1 was state-owned and 2 were leased by private vendors. As you can imagine, the 3 had very high fixed costs associated with them, but they were only getting marginally utilized because of that redundancy. Amazingly, the state's homegrown system, which the taxpayers spent tens of millions of dollars building, was the best of the 3. It was, the name of it is the Illinois Century Network. It's a fiber optic system, and like I said, it's just an outstanding standing network. It had been serving just hospitals and schools in Illinois, although its capacity was substantially greater, but it was getting none of the rest of the volume of the government. 6 months ago, we launched the consolidation of the 3 systems. The new network will increase our capacity 4-fold, increase utilization by 3-fold, and I'm telling you, it makes a big difference. We increased our marginal cost, or reduced our marginal cost by 45%. Look, perhaps this stuff isn't sexy to you. IT stuff never is. But we have reduced our IT expenditures by $115 million annually so far, and that's damn sexy to me. I need to just stress this one more time, because that's $115 million that doesn't have to get cut from education, and it's $115 million that we don't have to go get by raising your taxes. It makes a difference. Let me change gears on you one more time. Let me tell you a little bit about the property of the state. Again, to remind you, the state has over 60 million square feet of property. 50 million owned, 10 million leased. And just to give you some context for that, I think the Sears Tower is approximately 4 million square feet. The state spends upwards of $450 million a year on property management. We have 2,700 employees, and again, to put that in perspective, that's nearly 5% of the state's payroll. Once again, when we began to look at property management, what we found was offensive by any standard. Not to sound like a broken record, but every agency, had its own property management division with no statewide coordination. When I asked for management reports on our leases, and we had 750 separate leases, I couldn't even get a list of what leases we had or where any of the property was located. It was all too conveniently cumbersome to produce. Amazingly, we would enter into new leases despite the fact that the Auditor General reported that we had a 30% vacancy rate in much of our property portfolio. Perhaps it would be less surprising when I tell you how the decision to enter into a lease was made. An agency would fill out a brief form stating its space criteria and its location. CMS was expected to automatically rubber stamp that and begin to RFP for the space with no holistic evaluation of our space circumstances. Here's a quick true story. In my first 2 months on the job, we had an agency that had Class A space in Streeterville with 20 parking spots for its employees. Their lease was expiring, and they submitted that request for lease space that gave CMS like 2 blocks of flexibility to go look for space for them. We thanked them for their request, except this time we decided to inventory where we had excess space. And guess what? Lo and behold, we found excess space in the South Loop that the state already owned. Their new location was not Class A, and it didn't come with 20 parking spots. But Frank Cruzy will be happy to know it was next to the CTA bus stop. Needless to say, I didn't get a Christmas card from that agency that year. But by eliminating that one lease, we saved the state nearly $1 million over the term of that renewal. Perhaps most offensive is the fact that there was no coordination at all in how we managed our facilities. Frequently, we have agencies located in close proximity to one another and sometimes even in the same building. One agency may have a carpenter that can only stay busy 20% of the time, and yet right across the street, another agency has to go out and hire an independent contractor to get its work done. That's not just wasteful, it's just downright stupid. I'm happy to report to you today that we have been actively consolidating space and facility management operations into one organization at CMS. Today, every lease has been abstracted electronically with hundreds of individual facts captured that can produce exceptional management reports. We've completed nearly 40 million square feet of facility condition assessment, which gives us real information on what our capital priorities are. We've implemented a central call center with a ticketing system that tracks every work request from a consolidated agency. And this will provide us with substantial data on the efficiency with which we are operating and the quality of service that we are providing to our other agencies. We're implementing things like service level agreements. Those are SLAs, those are contracts between CMS and the other agencies. SLAs are common in the private sector. They're unheard of in government, and they hold us accountable to a level of service. We did basic things. Paul talked to us about the Thompson Center. I hate that building. Trust me, it's horrible. I blame him for not throwing his body in front of the bulldozers when they were trying to build it.
Many people tried.
Many. The Belandic building right across the street, by simply reconfiguring the space that's there, we extracted 50,000 square feet of excess space that was being unused, and we began to relocate our people into space that taxpayers already paid for instead of the leases that we had out there. This is what we mean by running the business of government like a business. What I've shared with you today is a small sample of the initiatives and accomplishments underway. I realize that the kind of information I'm sharing doesn't make headlines. And frankly, I've been disappointed to find that I don't even know if the media or the public even gives a damn. But when our governor talks about ending business as usual, this is what he is talking about, and this is the stuff that's going on every single day in this administration. And I need you all to know that. So what's next on our radar? We're going to take on workers' compensation next. The state spends nearly $80 to $90 million a year on workers' comp. That's for our employees. I'm not talking about workers' comp in general. And there are more than 30,000 open cases. Frankly, I'm furious at the abuse that goes on in this area. While there are many examples I could highlight, let me share with you the video of an employee who filed for a workers' comp claim. Instead of just rubber stamping another claim, for the first time, I dispatched CMS police investigators to document what this person was doing. He either had a miraculous recovery or the claim was bogus. Needless to say, that claim was rejected. Anyone filing a false claim against the state and stealing from the taxpayers should expect this exact same type of scrutiny. I didn't even see the video myself, so. Okay. Look, for the past 2 years, we have lived the governor's mandate to do more with less. I've shared with you much about the less part. I don't want to leave out some of the more because we've got some pretty cool things going on there as well. CMS, in cooperation with the Department of Commerce, Jack Lavin's group, is doing a lot to try and help small businesses in Illinois. The first thing we're doing is holding training classes on how do you do procurements with state business. Frankly, it's still a cumbersome process, and we want to train those companies on how you do that. Next, last year I submitted legislation that was approved and actually went into effect this month that gave me the authority to substantially expand the small business set-aside program. And finally, I don't know, for those vendors who are here, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, but the state is offensively bad in how it pays its bills. We will bankrupt companies before we pay them. And the truth of the matter is we're scaring a lot of companies away from giving us business. So I'm personally now in discussions with local banks here in Chicago to try and modify our contracts so that hopefully they can accept those as collateral to begin to help cash flow for some of these companies. Let me change a little bit else. We're doing stuff for the rural communities on the Moore side. I mentioned to you just a minute ago the Illinois Century Network, an outstanding network that has huge capabilities. About 14% of the rural communities in Illinois have no access to high-speed internet. And as a result of that, you have a student in Effingham who has no access to that, while you have a student in Barrington that has full access to the potential of technology. It's not fair and it's not right. We are now in the process of expanding high-speed internet to areas where the private sector simply cannot afford to go. And the best part is the marginal cost of the state is negligible because we've already paid for those systems that are in place. On public safety, today there are 3 different public safety law enforcement networks used by the state and municipal government. This lack of consistency greatly minimizes their effectiveness to work with one another in law enforcement. We are now instituting a standard platform that will let us, all state and municipal government agencies, operate on one system, and all of them are very excited about that. In the way of human services, as a result of the consolidation of our infrastructure, as I mentioned to you in our IT rationalization, and putting everyone on standard platforms with standard protocols, for example, a caseworker now will be able to tap information from DCFS, the Department of Employment Securities, the Department of of Health, and actually give that individual the ability to better serve that client while at the same time ensuring that there is no abuse that's done to the state welfare system. All of those things are going on as we speak. In closing, and I'm grateful for your listening today, this administration has now been in office for 2 years. We have streamlined, we've consolidated, and we've mitigated substantial waste and inefficiency. Our efforts have reduced operating expenses by hundreds of millions of dollars, and that save continues. Yet this is more than about saving money. It's about setting new priorities in this administration without coming to ask you for more taxes by raising your income and sales taxes. Needless to say, we have a long way to go, but hopefully you agree we're on the right track. And hopefully you have a better understanding of the business of your state government. Thank you for listening today. Sure.
A lot of applause. If you have a question, Michael will be happy to answer. Well, we'll answer. I don't know if we have. Line up by the microphone over there, and while you're getting ready, unbelievably, Jay missed somebody. It's never happened yet. State Senator Bill Brady from Bloomington. Stand up. There he is. Welcome to the blue country. Sorry. Can't help myself. Go ahead.
Okay.
The rules, because we got the rules. You have to state your name and who you represent, and then if you wish to sandbag, it's okay. But as long as we know who you are and who you represent, fire away.
Okay, my name is Michael Ranzelowski. I'm a member of the City Club. I'm also a lawyer by profession. And my question to you is, where is the social part of the equation as far as, are there any programs for minority set-asides, or are there any plans the state has to kind of introduce or keep business in the state vis-a-vis both things coming from foreign countries versus business being developed in Illinois? Thank you.
Great question. Under CMS, there is a bureau called the Bureau of Enterprise Program, the Bureau Enterprise Program. It is a program that is designed to certify minority companies. It is, I'll be very blunt about this. I think the program is very weak. It is different than the City of Chicago's program and the Cook County's program, but frankly, I don't represent it to be any better. It creates the false illusion that we are helping minority businesses. We've taken it on, and one of Governor Blagojevich's top priorities was to put in place a real minority program that helps. All of us, though, have read in the last 2 weeks exactly what has been going on in the City of Chicago and I guess in sometimes Cook County. The charge back to us was, give me a real program that doesn't have the abuses that are associated with it. We've been spending a lot of time on it. I am happy to announce to you this. We are, and I think the governor announced this a couple weeks ago at Rainbow Push, we are actually beginning for the first time to put minority requirements into some of our contracts on a pilot program basis. Before we just had goals and we had, you know, these things where if someone participated, that was great, and if they didn't, that was great. But now we're going to start taking real tangible steps to ensure that minority companies and real minority companies get an opportunity. And I'm telling you this, hear me, on my watch, there will never be a fake minority company doing business with the state of Illinois.
The state of Illinois has developed most of the electronic wonders of the 20th century, yet when they get developed, they end up having to go other places to be finalized. Like the transistor was invented at the University of Illinois. The internet was essentially invented by people from the University of Illinois. And you go on and on with all these innovations, yet there's, you know, people who do these things, they do it on a research basis, but when it comes time to make money and do it on a more practical basis, they go elsewhere.
And the question is?
Does the state have any plans or any programs to try to change that?
You know, yes. In fact, I didn't mention this in my speech. I'm going to be requesting legislation. I have to tell you, as a free marketer and as a fiscal conservative, this kind of goes against my philosophy. But we're going to ask for the right in the procurement code to give a 2% advantage to Illinois-based companies. Now, frankly, the only reason I'm a big advocate of this is that all the surrounding states currently have this. And we are basically opening the door into Illinois, but our companies are getting shut out in other states that they attempt to get business. So I will be asking the legislature for that advantage. I don't know whether that directly answers your question. I know you touched on some of the foreign company issues. There's no issues there until that's, you know, defined to me in the procurement code, but that's the one thing we're going to try and do for Illinois companies.
You addressed a lot of the infrastructure moves within your department. Could you talk a little bit about how you're going to change the talent infrastructure within state government?
The talent meaning like human talent? Or?
Human talent. How are you going to attract talent, hold on to good talent, etc.?
Well, you know, let me at least talk about that at CMS and hopefully using that as an example for the rest of the government. Like I had said to you in my speech, the governor gave me unbelievable latitude to hire outstanding people. We've brought in, CMS is an agency that's full of bureaucracy, and frankly, we all know how difficult it has changed bureaucracy. But if you are going to change bureaucracy, the way you do it is you just frankly change the management who are holding on to that bureaucracy. And within almost all of the different bureaus at CMS, we've changed the top level, and in many cases 2 or 3 levels down. Now look, because you used to be there doesn't mean that you were bad. We also found many starlets that were waiting to prosper within our organization, and many of those got promoted to strong leadership positions within the organization. The bottom line is everyone needs to drink the Kool-Aid and decide that they're going to go in the direction that we're going in, or we're going to pass them by. And I believe we've had a lot of luck at doing that.
Any other questions? Dr. Bob, go to the microphone. Mr. O'Connor, you know, you could go to the microphone too. I mean,
Yeah, Bob Donaldson from Governor State. Does Caremark come under your?
It does.
And could you speak a little about that for us? Because I know I'm from Governor State University, and I've received several letters, and it seems like those letters are strong arm types. And I'd like to speak with you about, but if you could just tell us a little about that.
Sure. Let me, I'm sure the masses here probably don't know what he's referring to. Caremark is our PBM. They supply our drugs for all state employees, university employees, retirees, about 400,000 people, which I don't think I mentioned earlier. We're the Benefits Bureau for the state as well. The drug issue is this. It falls into the same category, frankly, as everything else. When we took office, we had a $5 billion deficit. Our priority was to cut costs. One of the ways that we were going to cut costs, our medical costs were rising exponentially, as we all know. We decided that we were going to start promoting mail-order drugs much more. Our costs were a fraction of what they were if you went for a 30-day prescription from the pharmacist. You still had that option. But for any needs that you had that went over 30 days, we started to create a lot of incentives for individuals to go out for mail order. And the reality is, until you see the numbers in aggregate and the level of impact that's going to have, it's hard perhaps to understand why we had to, what must have perceived to be a lower quality of service, the cost simply just outweighed it. Caremark itself, however, is controversial. And for those of you that are unaware, we are actually in the midst of an RFP process, so I won't be able to comment on that. And the legislature had its own problem with Caremark in regards to transparency. Hopefully all of those issues are getting addressed as we speak, and we'll be making our announcement on the direction that we're going to be taking the PBMs shortly. Thank you for the question.
My name is Phil O'Connor. I'm not going to ask a question, Mike. I'm going to pay a compliment that's based on recent experience I had with you. And I think it's worth noting. Everyone probably read about the out-of-country voting that's going on in the Iraq elections for Iraqi Americans locally here in Chicago. It's a very large community. And I've been involved in that for a couple of months trying to get the arrangements together. And when the people from the International Organization for Migration were parachuted into town just a few weeks ago with a very compressed time schedule to get things done, there were a few people for whom there was no need to haggle or draw a picture, who promptly did things that made the whole thing work. Two of them are in this room, actually, Jack Dorgan, Village of Rosemont, and Mike Rumman. Mike was able to make furniture available overnight for these operations to open up. And this was something that otherwise would have taken days to get together. It's not a trivial matter. This goes right to the matter of human rights and what this whole thing is about. And I want to thank you for that because I'm a veteran of the last 4 Republican administrations, and I'd like to think that I was pretty decisive in the jobs that I had, but you take the cake.
Thanks, Phil. That's kind of you to say.
That certainly will be repeated come next February, or certainly a couple of years from now. Yes.
I'd like to address the
State your name.
arts
State your
across
name. Your name.
Illinois,
State your
the
name, sir.
fine arts. I am assistant director of the Illinois Philharmonic. We sort of support the southern suburbs, and we haven't seen the governor come on over. It's his orchestra. It's your orchestra. It's all these people's orchestra, especially the southern suburbs. We help the cultural end. We have now been picking up the schools that have been cutting their music department. We go out to the schools. We need your help. Tell the governor, would you please?
All right.
We operate out of the Fine Arts Center in Governor State University, and pound for pound, dollar for dollar, we're good as the Chicago Symphony.
All right. Good, well said. Unaccustomed as I am to Governor State University, I vouch for that.
Are you? You get out that way.
Hard to believe, but I was there for 26 years. We just must have missed each other. Okay. Right, Dr. Bob, you vouch? Okay, well, let's give a big round of applause for Mike.